Hello viewers, I'm thrilled to be joined by fellow YouTuber Genetically Modified Skeptic, who shares my lack of belief in Christianity or any other religion for that matter. His name is Drew. I can't give you his full name for reasons that we'll go into, but Drew, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I'm an admirer of your work, and I'm just happy to have the opportunity to speak with you.
I am an admirer of your work as well, and in fact it was one of your recent videos that really made me think I've got to get Drew on the channel. You made a video titled "I'm an Atheist Activist in the Closet," which I just found fascinating because frankly I didn't know you were in the closet. When someone's got a YouTube channel about atheism, that's not what you kind of associate with someone being kind of concealed. So maybe you could just talk us through what prompted you to make that video.
Well, I mean, now that I have a more regular audience, now that I have a more regular reach, I get pretty regular messages from people who tell me that my work encourages them, and it almost is. It made me sick to think of not only what these people were going through, but what was happening in my life that they didn't know about. Teenagers, like I said in that video, messaging me saying, I'm in the closet and thank you for what you do. I need to hear this kind of stuff because it keeps me sane. All that kind of stuff. I mean, you need to hear from people who are like-minded. But what those teenagers a lot of the time would say is, I hope that one day I can do what you do, or something like that. And I'm like, I mean, I'm not in that much of a different situation to you. I just have a camera and some editing software, and I make videos. But other than that, I'm not really any different from you. Of course, I don't live with my parents. I'm on my own, so I'm not at risk like a lot of the people that message me. But I basically felt like I needed to be honest with my audience, because I don't think anybody really realized that how deep I am in the closet in most instances in my life. So it was about being transparent, and then I decided to really speak about why I do this and why I think that it's possible for more people to do this. If that video gets a few people to start a YouTube channel that does something similar, then perfect. If one person does that, then, mission accomplished.
So just to be absolutely clear, when we say you're in the closet, I mean, obviously your face is on YouTube, you have a massive channel, you are kind of associated among the atheist YouTube community as being an atheist, but when it comes to your private life, when it comes to people who actually have perhaps grown up with you or who you have grown up with, they don't know you're an atheist. Would that be right?
Right. So just to put it in perspective, right now, I am talking to somebody who is a fellow atheist activist. I blocked off time in my afternoon to do this. Totally normal, right? Like, the majority of people who have ever seen my face at this point think of me as being someone who would normally do what we're doing right now. Last night, I mean, not even... just a little more than 12 hours ago, late last night, I was hanging out with one of my friends from college. And we went and saw Black Panther, and then we were hanging out and we were talking philosophy like we always do. They are evangelical Christians, this couple that we hung out with. And my friend and I started talking about politics and about ethics and all this kind of stuff. And totally secular conversation. But just in passing, my friend says, and I think really what we're talking about here, the gospel has a fantastic perspective on. And the gospel is perfect peace and perfect justice, perfect mercy, all combined into one. And so I strive to be someone that exudes the values of the gospel. And I nod along as if I agree, but don't really confirm. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. Like, I get. I tell him, okay, cool. Like, I think I know what you mean. And then I just go on. He has no clue.
Just so I can get this in perspective, because I've just been to see Black Panthers today. Great film. I just want to kind of envision this properly. So you went to see Black Panther with your friend who is an evangelical Christian. At what point did this talking about the gospel come up? Was it immediately on walking out of the cinema? Was it later going for a meal later? Just talk me through that. I'm fascinated by, because that's an odd thing to just randomly start talking about on a night out, isn't it?
And well, the thing is that here, no. It's totally normal. I mean, we were talking about politics. Yeah, we're talking about. If for your viewers, I'll say I'm near like Dallas, Texas. We're talking about politics, ethics, philosophy, the perfect encapsulation of the best ethical principles, philosophical thought. Everything is perfectly encapsulated in the gospel according to most people here, and so that's. Honestly, it was completely organic to the situation, and I didn't think that it was odd that came up. And we went to a Christian college together. Completely normal for that to come up, but it only became strange almost 2 years ago when I said, I don't believe that stuff anymore. He has no idea, but I go along with that conversation. Because it's, for reasons I talk about in the video, almost unnecessarily difficult. Well, I wouldn't mind if he talked to me about that kind of stuff, but I also don't want him to feel awkward if he wants to.
I guess I need to, remind myself that, again, it's a different culture where you live. I mean, I grew up in the UK, which, ironically, even though it has a less secular constitution than America, is a more secular country, right? Because religion doesn't dominate public discourse as it does in America. But I have had a taste of what it's like. I haven't been to Texas yet, but I have been to Arizona, and there were Christian billboards and bumper stickers, and every other radio station was a Christian evangelical radio station. So I did get a slight taste of that culture, but it does just strike me as, it reminds me basically of my time as a JW, because when I was a JW, almost every conversation was along those lines, and almost every conversation, if you were hanging around with a spiritually mature person, which was what you were encouraged to do, almost every conversation would veer onto the Bible, onto JW beliefs, and I guess I'd forgotten what that was like in a social context.
I mean, it's the thing that defines all of our identities, including what they think defines my identity, is being a follower of Jesus Christ. So if you are talking about a movie, I mean, the movie had to do with a lot of social issues. Black Panther talking about topics of race and oppression. And so we had fun talking about those things. Politically, we're not as different as we are spiritually, I guess. We're both a little bit closer to the center, him a little bit more on the right, me a little bit more on the left, but we can talk about those things. But regardless of our political ideas, he thinks that we are united in that we have the same basic identity, being a Christian. So that's a normal thing to bring up. And the majority of people that live here kind of assume the same thing, especially because I think that I come off as somewhat of a clean-cut, straight-laced kid most of the time, and people just assume.
Yeah, well, what you were saying as well about your friend saying that Christianity is the the perfect kind of system of moral governance as well. I mean, I don't talk about my atheism every day with my wife. My wife is an atheist, but she finds it difficult to use that word to describe herself. But we just happened to be talking about atheism on our way to the cinema, kind of the opposite conversation to the one you were having by the sounds of it. And we were saying about how if you had like a society that was policed by robots, and the robots were programmed with the laws of both Old and New Testaments, it would be a nightmare. It would, people would just be randomly executed in the streets. It would just be chaos. So it's astonishing to me that people can hold on to that. And I can remember holding on to that idea myself when I was a JW.
Exactly, and that's why it can come up into conversation, and I can take it in a way that's not me saying, so you think that women can't speak in church? Or, you think that people should be, slaughtered for this or that? There should be the death penalty for this or that? Or, that's not the way that I see it, because I've been in their shoes, and I can understand how there can be a certain amount of cognitive dissonance to where what they're saying with what they're implying, it actually makes sense. It's consistent with what we're talking about, but they just may have a certain amount of cognitive dissonance because of their acceptance of all of these principles that we consider ridiculous. But I mean, it's a whole other subject as to how people can do that, but it is just incredibly normal.
I actually, one thing I actually really appreciate about your content, and the same applies for Alex O'Connor and a number of the other kind of current crop of up-and-coming sort of atheist YouTubers. What I really like is the onus on kindness and empathy and trying to remember what it's like to be a believer. Because I don't know what you think about this, but it seems to me that you can be an atheist, and but that doesn't mean you are not necessarily equipped to reach out with compassion and understanding to a believer when you don't know what it's like to be a believer, or at least it would be more challenging to reach out to a believer if you can't remember or don't know what it's like to believe yourself.
Yeah, I think that empathy is key in order to have a productive conversation. And so, having come from the same culture as, the friend I was talking to, it's not that difficult, I think, for me to understand. And I think you'd probably say something similar about JWs. As radical as we can say that kind of ideology is, we can understand where they're coming from and kind of put ourselves in their shoes. But I think that that's absolutely vital if we ever want to change someone's mind. I do think that a certain kind of firebrand may change people's minds to a certain extent. But I know, at least from where I came from, I would have never done anything but push someone away if they were purposely offensive or, called me names or something like that. Any kind of derogatory language, I would just throw out immediately and say, well, this is just the spawn of Satan. As horrible as that sounds, that's how, I was taught to think. So I appreciate what Alex does, definitely. And as you know, I've been inspired by Alex to lead a similar kind of conversation. And hopefully in my own way, but I think that it's absolutely a vital role to be filled, especially on YouTube, given the amount of, theists are dumb memeage that's out there.
Yeah, I think we need to try as much as possible to steer away from that. And don't get me wrong, Firebrand, I agree, does have its place. I just think you need to be incredibly skilled to be both Firebrand and persuasive. And I'm thinking particularly of Christopher Hitchens, who was kind of one of the key kind of atheist thinkers whose material really made me start questioning my own belief in God. He said some shocking things, or shocking from the perspective of a believer, but he had the charisma and the charm and the intelligence and the wit to pull it off. In a way that just made you think, damn, he's got a point there. And not every firebrand atheist has that, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that he has. I would say that I don't really know that I knew much about him aside from just his name before I came out of fundamentalism. And it's something important to say is I didn't actually get engaged in any kind of atheist or religious or non-religious media until after I had already said that I'm an atheist.
Really?
I had seen one atheist YouTube video that I could remember, and it was TJ Kirk, and it was probably 2009 when that happened. And I was just in high school.
So it was just purely through thinking things through yourself that you arrived at your atheism.
Yeah. See, when I was going through things, I knew that the first objection that anyone would have if I changed my mind, even if I went to a different denomination, I knew I would be told that I was deceived by someone else, especially because I was young. Who cares what Paul said to Timothy about, not looking down on people because they're young, or don't let someone look down upon you because you're young. I knew that people would do that, and it wouldn't be me using my own brain. It would be someone deceiving me, or Satan deceiving me, something like that. So I decided I should be able to reason through this, go through this philosophically, and decide whether or not there actually is a good reason to believe. So I basically engaged in kind of a self-cognitive behavioral therapy, which is essentially street epistemology, but I'd never heard of it. And I just asked myself questions again and again and again. I'm the kind of person who asks a lot of questions, so I turned them toward myself. And I wanted to see if, given the evidence that I had, or even just given the, philosophical implications of the gospel, is this even possible? And it took about 4 months to where I got to the point where I thought, I cannot be a Christian. This doesn't make any sense. I actually can't even really feel confident in any kind of supernatural belief whatsoever, and that's why I didn't really explore other religions beyond learning about them. I didn't try them out just to see if they would work, kind of thing, like some people do. It was really, street epistemology, but on myself. And I was pretty moderate, pretty mild. I thought, wow, this really sucks. A lot of people are probably going through this just like me. And I thought, I don't know, I guess I'll start learning about that. I started watching some YouTube videos, like Hemant Mehta's videos, and I found Christopher Hitchens, all of his, quips and hitch slaps and stuff like that are on there. And I ended up reading God Is Not Great, and probably halfway through that book, I was an anti-theist.
Right, yeah. So he took you from atheist to anti-theist.
Yes,
Yeah.
And I've reevaluated that multiple times because I have that kind of self-doubt that was instilled in me. Make sure you're not getting deceived kind of thing, which is ironic coming from a fundamentalist background. To make sure, it's not just because Christopher Hitchens is charming and charismatic that I'm anti-theist, right? I think if you watch my channel, you'll see, no, it really doesn't have much to do with Christopher Hitchens, but he has made that impact on me for sure.
Yeah. I think it's probably worthwhile for anyone who's watching this who doesn't understand what anti-theism is, just to kind of explain it, and feel free to chip in. As what it means to me is that first and foremost, I'm an atheist insofar as that I don't see any compelling evidence that any religion is true. And I would be fascinated to see such evidence, but until it arrives, I have to take the default position of saying, well, none of the religions are true, and actually my life functions quite well without religion. But where the anti-theism comes in is that the character of the God of the Bible in particular is so obnoxious when you kind of look at it objectively, and once you stop believing in that God and you find yourself free to kind of objectively look at his, her, or its behavior as recorded in the book it's supposed to have inspired, you think, well, even if it could be proven that God existed, I still probably wouldn't want to worship it. That's the best explanation I can come up with. I don't know whether that resonates with you at all.
Yeah, so, and that's something that's really hit on in God Is Not Great, is talking about Abrahamic religion. I think that there's a chapter called There's No Eastern Solution, which I'd like to talk about at some point. But yeah, in reference to the Bible, I think that hits the nail on the head perfectly. As far as other religions go, anti-theism applies in that it's not necessarily always saying, oh, religion is harmful in every case. It probably at its most mild, it says that it's just completely unnecessary. And that's where I would say that I am when it comes to certain religions and certain almost just slightly more than being a philosophy, like Buddhism, for instance. I have Buddhist friends, and we agree on a lot of things. They're atheists, but they are also Buddhists, and I have some philosophical Buddhist friends, some spiritual Buddhist friends, and as far as that goes, I don't have an issue with most of it, but adhering to a dogma is unnecessary, and I have seen how it does affect them in the way that there is incredible guilt, for them at least, about the death of insects. They're against pesticides because it kills insects. I remember talking to some of my friends, and they felt, when they were in probably 5th or 6th year of school, learning about microorganisms and just having this existential crisis. Life is sacred and I am digesting these things. This is horrible. And of course, that's kind of a silly example, but it goes beyond that. It's unnecessary, I think, to adhere to dogma when it can potentially hold you back if there's new information to consider.
I'm like you in the way I feel about other people being religious. I can see it being harmless in a lot of cases. I guess my issue, first and foremost, if you're an adult, and the overwhelming majority of my viewers are hopefully adults, or I assume are adults, it doesn't make any difference to me whether you're religious or not religious. I'm quite comfortable. I would be quite fine with like 99% or 100% even of my viewership being religious and just being interested in what an atheist has to say. I'm just not going to lose any sleep if people decide based on what they know to be religious. I guess the only issue I have is when it comes to kids and when it comes to child indoctrination. And that's the problem that I think nearly all religions have, because it's not just enough for the adult to believe it. They've got to pass it on to their children. And just to illustrate that, I have like a 3-year-old daughter. She's obsessed with the YouTube, the videos that they put on YouTube that are just for kids, where they're kind of playing around with toys. And it just so happens that one of her favourite kind of toy videos is a channel called, I think it's called something like Growing Little Ones for Jesus. And it just kind of comes on out of nowhere. And first they're playing with kind of Paw Patrol toys and everything. And then at the end they start singing about Jesus for little ones. And I just find that side of religion, where they're actively trying to prey upon young minds, I guess that's where I really start to have a problem.
Yeah, and even if your religion is peaceful and basically harmless to an adult, there still can be a lot of harm that comes out of that, in that if it is a dogma and you do think that it's the perfect way to go about life and you do teach it to your children, what happens if your child strays from that? It's at that point, if you're dogmatic enough, regardless of how peaceful you are, you can be a Jain, like how Hemant Mehta was and how he was raised. You can have this amazingly peaceful, wonderful family, but because of that dogma and you not following that dogma anymore after being taught it as a child, there's massive tension there. I know that with Hemant Mehta, he's talked about how it's kind of weird sometimes when his parents will just talk about religious beliefs and he's sitting there nodding along, and it creates an unnecessary tension there. Whereas I'm not going to say that atheist parents don't, feel any tension at all if their child becomes religious, but they're not sitting there thinking, the thing is I know I'm 100% right and you're 100% wrong, and there's no way around that. They're not thinking that. So it's
well,
fundamentally
bottom line, they're not thinking my child's going to hell or Armageddon's going to come and kill my child if I don't convince them to follow my religion. Which is the case with Jehovah's Witnesses. So I think that that's where the urgency comes in, and that's where the true awkwardness comes in, because if Jessica, through her own investigations, decides to be religious, so long as she doesn't start shunning me or anything, I'm completely fine with it. I'm not thinking, I need to save Jessica to atheism. Yeah, there's no urgency basically. But you mentioned about the kind of family dynamic, and I guess that kind of, I need to get back onto that, because we are, after all, talking about when Christians stop believing. I'm right in saying, am I, that you're actually quite young. You told me before we went on camera that you're only 23, and you're married, I understand. Mm-hmm. So can you kind of, without wanting to pry too much, was it through your religion that you met your wife? And what you explained in your video, that you have people round to your house and you're having to kind of rearrange your filming gear so as to not give any evidence. Just how strongly entrenched is Christianity in your family?
Like I said, your core identity is expected to be as a follower of Christ. And if it is not that, fundamentally, who are you? What kind of identity could you possibly have? A wrong one. But my parents know. And my parents live much closer to us than her parents and her family. And so it out of necessity, it's basically been that my parents know. So there's no hiding.
Did you meet your wife through the religion?
Yeah, so we went to college together. And we met in college, and we have very similar backgrounds. I was raised much more fundamentalist than her, but basically it came down to the same kind of Baptist type beliefs. So it was, we had a very religious ceremony, getting married. When we got engaged, I think we did a devotional together and things like that. I led prayer. That's how it was, and it wasn't seen as abnormal, and we still don't look back on it and think that it was so abnormal, because that's what everyone did. That's what the culture is like. It would have been strange if we would not have had some kind of biblical message during our wedding ceremony. So that's how entrenched we both are in that kind of culture. And her parents will know one day. Her family will know one day. And this isn't really my wife's fight, but it definitely is mine. And so what I do affects her. But yeah, coming out to my family, the same, it's similar to coming out to her family. And I've talked about how kind of fundamentalist my parents are. So
how did they react when you came out to your parents?
Well, my parents suspected something was up, because I hadn't gone to church, and they hadn't got me to admit that I had been to a church within like the last year or so. And so we decided to go to their house, my wife and I, and talk to them. And basically it was we sat down, we had this allotted time to talk, and I
so there's this YouTube
boundaries.
channel.
Well, at the time when I came out, I didn't have a YouTube channel.
Right. Okay. Right.
I didn't start my YouTube channel until I was out to my parents, because I knew that if someone was going to find out, it would be my parents, and I didn't want to be outed to my parents specifically on the internet. So we're basically sitting down, having this conversation, or about to have this conversation that we've decided to have about where I am, or what I believe, or what my spiritual life is like, something like that. And I think that my mom just said, okay, so let's start this up. What do you believe? And I was like sitting there thinking, are they thinking that I'll say, I'm like Christian, but I don't really care that much? And so I think they were shocked when I said, well, I'll break down the definition for you, but I would say I'm an agnostic atheist. And I thought it was going to be like this huge, just surprised body posture, but it was, what is that? I've never heard of that. And I'm thinking, I don't understand how they couldn't have by this point in their lives. But then I went on to explain what I meant by that, and it was just at that point, there has to be a creator. Look at the mountains, look at the trees. You're being tricked by the devil. All of the really basic Christian 101 type arguments that can be rebutted easily at that point. I think that we peacefully, no yelling, a little bit of tears on my parents' side, but we just talked, and we kind of debated for like 2.5 hours. My wife is sitting there almost asleep on the couch because she was just sitting there being like, oh my gosh, why does Drew have to explain this to them? They should know this by now. And eventually they just said, there's nothing we could ever say to convince you. And I said, I could be convinced, but the arguments you've presented are not convincing, and I've demonstrated why. And they agreed. And after that point, it was like, please don't try to convert me. Before you knew, an hour ago or a couple hours ago, we had normal conversations, and we didn't have to talk about spiritual stuff all the time. It can be exactly the same way, so let's make it that way. And so that's how it is, but sometimes little bits of witnessing and God's love slip in here and there, and that's always a little awkward, but I'm able to get around it through ways that I described in my video, kind of changing the subject, that kind of stuff.
But I can't help but be jealous that you still have a relationship, because that is not how the conversation would go with Jehovah's Witness parents, or most Jehovah's Witness parents. If you just said, well, quite frankly, I don't believe in God anymore, you're going to get shunned. Or if that becomes known to the elders, you're definitely going to get shunned. So it still must have been quite an emotional conversation nonetheless. Did your wife kind of independently arrive at her atheism, or do you feel that perhaps your atheism played a part in her non-belief? I'm assuming she identifies as an atheist, of course, but
there's not really a label or anything there.
Yeah.
Just agree on most things.
Sure.
So I'm pretty comfortable as far as my label goes. But I didn't decide to be a spiritual leader or anything like that. It was just, I just did my own thing, and eventually she was like, yeah, that makes sense. And it was just kind of a non-issue.
I guess the reason why I asked that is not just because I'm being nosy, but I guess if I were in your shoes, you mentioned about her parents and the possibility of her parents finding out. I would be thinking, when they find out, and really it's a case of when rather than if. When they find out, they're going to think of me as the person who's dragged her away from her relationship with God. Does that play on your mind at all?
Oh, 100%. My parents completely think that, because the man is the spiritual leader of the house, and women can't have independent thoughts or whatever. Just total BS. But because they assume that that's my role, and they think it should be my role, they think that I continued with that role, but toward atheism rather than toward Christ-likeness. So my parents think that, so I'm sure that that theme will completely continue. That trend will continue seamlessly for just about anybody else that would find out, I'm sure.
I just find it fascinating because, a lot of the people watching this, a lot of my viewers will be former Jehovah's Witnesses, or even they might still be Jehovah's Witnesses, and they will be able to fully identify with what you're saying, and yet you weren't raised as a Jehovah's Witness. I think it's really helpful to see just how pervasive this level of control is in religion in general. You don't need a group of leaders in a cult compound in upstate New York to have religion be this big a part of people's lives.
Oh yeah, definitely. I really honestly can't say that any religious practice that I ever engaged in was cultish. I mean, there was kind of oppressive tendencies, and there was a lot of guilt. There's just a lot of guilt in being an independent fundamental Baptist as I was raised. But we could have left the church at any time. No one shunned anyone. At one point, we had an atheist living in our house because they had trouble with their parents because of their atheism. And I didn't know they were an atheist at the time. I found out much later because, of course, I can't know that that person's an atheist when I'm a child because they'll just lead me to hell with them. But no shunning or anything like that. But when it comes to, I think, the inner dialogue that people have in their minds when they have this kind of interpersonal issue because of religion, I think it's very, very similar across the Baptist lines and the Jehovah's Witnesses lines. For the Jehovah's Witnesses, I think that seem not to take shunning particularly seriously. I would say usually those are a little bit more distant from internal structure, because if you don't take that seriously, that you might get shunned yourself. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course. But
it depends on whether you're related or not. So if you are not related, then you absolutely will get shunned. If you are related, then it's not a disfellowshipping offence, but you are still manipulated through the videos and through the literature to shun your disfellowshipped or disassociated family members.
Yeah, and so the thoughts that I think that a parent may have when their child deconverts would be almost the same in my case and in the case that of any Jehovah's Witness. Luckily, there are certain points where it's a little bit more moderate, if you can call it that, here versus in the home of a Jehovah's Witness. But there are striking and frightening similarities there for sure. Absolutely.
Well, it's really fascinating for me to go over it with you, and again to see these areas of commonality with my own experience growing up in a religious family. If there are any Christians watching this who are closeted unbelievers, what would be your message to them?
I think I would say, given my background in mental health and working in social work, the most important thing that I think that these kids need to do, or even adults in this kind of situation need to do, is develop coping skills quickly. This is a potential mental health crisis. As frightening as that sounds, it needs to be treated seriously. You are worth working on. You are worth getting over the oppression that you're suffering at the moment. I could directly say there's no reason to blame yourself. If you believe this, or if you don't believe this, then that's not something you have perfect control over, despite what anyone may say. If you feel like how I do a lot of the time, that just the fact that you believe something different may hurt someone else, it's actually okay. That is not your fault. You didn't choose that, and I'm sure that a lot of people would say, I don't want to hurt my family. I don't want to hurt my close friends just by being me, but I can't stop being me. It's okay to be you. Discover ways to cope with the guilt that a lot of us feel for that kind of thing as quickly as you can. And by that, I mean, discover secret communities that you can speak to online. There are tons of private Facebook groups that you can get involved with. There are, you can even make a completely new Facebook account that's not attached to any email anyone knows. You can be on the dark side of Twitter and talk to a bunch of godless people that will, talk you up and help you feel like you're not alone. There even are some YouTube channels where they are run by people that are in the closet and know what you're going through, and hopefully their word may be able to help you out there too. And I've heard that there are some people who start out their YouTube channels under an alias and then end up using their real name and interviewing
like
people like Genetically Modified Skeptic. Yeah. There's progress to be made, and you are worth making that progress. It's not worth giving up on yourself. There are ways that you can get through this.
Very, very uplifting, encouraging words to conclude on. Thank you, Drew. And just again, well done with the work that you're doing. Again, I just think it's very, very, very encouraging to see a community on YouTube and YouTubers in particular who are approaching these arguments with the empathy and with the compassion, and with the relatability when it comes to what it means to be a believer and what it means to have your entire life, as you say, defined by a set of beliefs that you were given. So keep up the great work.
Well, I appreciate it. I hope that people on both sides discover the usefulness of empathy in all of these situations. If we can disagree but still have empathy toward each other, then we're all going to be better off. But I appreciate you bringing me on.
Oh, absolutely. And before you go, I must, of course, just encourage you guys to check out the Genetically Modified Skeptic channel, and please do subscribe. And Drew, before you go, I understand there is an event coming up, and is there anything else that you would like to plug, including that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So a lot of my fellow YouTubers and I have been really working really hard over the last month or so, maybe 2 months at this point, to figure out an event that we could run, that we could put on, that would help build our atheist YouTube community and really have us have a chance to interact with our fans. So there's going to be an event happening. I'm lucky it's in Dallas, Texas, April 7th. We're going to be having some talks, having some beers and hanging out. You'll get to meet the people that you feel like you probably already know, but you don't, because it's just the internet. But it's going to be called Faithless Forum. We will have Anthony Magnabosco there being our keynote and opening speaker, and hopefully we'll develop a little bit further and be able to announce some other people who will be speaking. But I think it's going to be a fantastic time. So if you are really into the atheist YouTube community, if you want to learn how you can make an impact on the culture around you, then this is the place to go. It's going to be affordable. So I hope to see plenty of you there. If any of Lloyd's local audience in Croatia wants to come out, I absolutely applaud you, because you will be spending much more money just flying out than we are in I
don't think you're going to get any Croatians going. I hate to disappoint you, but I do.
Well, if we get anybody from overseas, then they'll get a free hug from me, because I just applaud them for actually.
That's worth the entry alone. That's worth the entry. You look very huggable. Did you say April 7th?
Yeah, it's going to be Saturday, April 7th, coming up in a month and a half or so. We'll make tickets available very soon. We're just getting some of the last details sorted out with that. And I'm sure that if you follow kind of our community, you will see details of that popping up very soon. If you subscribe to me or follow me on Twitter, you will definitely know about the details.
Fantastic. So if you're in Texas, in the Dallas, I know Texas is a massive place. But if you're within reach of Dallas on April 7th, please do go along. I'm sure you'll have a fantastic time, and you obviously have the promise of a hug from Drew, which I'm sure he will be able to deliver on. So, Drew, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, I appreciate it.
Okay, so guys, that's all we have time for on this occasion, but please don't forget to subscribe for more videos, and as always, thank you for watching.